is First Strike, First Look, right here on VSiN on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Dave Ross, joined by our producer extraordinaire, Britton Hess, back in the program. Britton here on a Tuesday before we get to Friday's First Strike for everybody on VSiN, wherever you get your podcasts, of course. But Britton, before we look ahead to what should be a very intriguing main event on this card coming up on Saturday, let's take a look back at the two title bouts that we just saw on Saturday night. Look, I think the fans maybe wanted a little bit more after Israel Adesanya gave you one of the most iconic walkouts that we've ever seen in UFC history when he went full Undertaker and Paul Bearer on us. But really a pedestrian-like performance for Izzy, at least for the fans' sake, where he gets a 5-round unanimous decision over Jared Cannonier to remain the middleweight champion of the world. And I look at it and I get it, and I think you get it, Britton, but maybe some new to the sport don't get it, that was actually a virtuesque performance by Izzy there, where he didn't have to take any chances and really kept Jared Cannonier in the end of his punches and could kind of do what he wanted to do in there. What was your takeaway from the main event?
Yeah, it was kind of exactly what we talked about all week last week with just, I don't know how Cannonier can get close enough to do damage. Izzy moves too well. Izzy has too much range. Izzy is too smart, too technical. And it is kind of sad that there wasn't a big finish or a big, a photo opportunity with a guy getting, blood sprayed across the cage. But
right.
At the same time, when you're a guy on Israel's level who's cleared out the entire division, you're not proving anything to anyone. You don't need to take risks. You can just do what it takes to win. If somebody leaves their chin out, sure, take advantage of it. But Cannonier also knew what he was getting into, and it felt like Cannonier knew from the beginning he didn't have much of a shot in this one. He just didn't want to, embarrass himself.
Yeah, and he did not, and it was a technical fight. And look, I was thinking that if Cannonier is going to get the win, it's going to have to come from KO. That clearly did not happen, as he could not get inside to make this a physical fight. And he had some opportunities up against the cage and kind of pushed Izzy back a couple of times. But you saw Izzy's eyes. If you really watched the infighting there, he knew what Cannonier was trying to do every time. He's just felt one step ahead. I think you could say the same thing about the CoMain event with Alexander Volkanovski against Max Holloway. If you liked Max by decision, which I was leaning to at 3-1, well, that was over after the first round. You could tell right away that Volk was an even better Alexander Volkanovski. And it was interesting because last week on First Strike, when we had John Anik on and Cub Swanson and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, they were alluding to the fact that he's gotten better. Volkanovski's getting better as arguably the best 145-pounder in the history of the division. I know Jose Aldo stands might say something about that. Maybe even Conor McGregor in his heyday at 145. But what'd you make of the performance by Volk the third time around?
Knowing how good Volk is and has been, for him to improve that much is like nothing I've ever seen. Because it's like he's already at on top of the mountain. It's like, how do you go higher when you're on top of the mountain? It's like he's like building a helicopter or getting a hot air balloon or something, getting higher still, despite all odds. But yeah, no, it looked like, Max Holloway looked like a pedestrian at best fighter, which we know he's not. So that just speaks to Volkanovski, because it was not close at all. Volk was never scared. Volk had the power advantage. He had the speed advantage. He didn't have the reach advantage, but he can't grow his arms in the gym. But everything else he's doing in the gym seems like it's working. So I was super impressed with Alexander Volkanovski. And I don't know if you caught the moment with him talking to Cejudo after the fight. They might be trying to set something up, which I can't. I would love to watch that. I feel like Cejudo might be a little too small for him, but Cejudo has proven me wrong plenty of times in the past. So hopefully we get to see that fight, because I think that's the only real move for Volkanovski at this point.
Yeah, and the interesting there is, though, he could go the other way, and he could go up to 155 and challenge for the lightweight crown, because you look at it here and you go, well, now he's really cleaned out the 45s when you look at beating Max Holloway 3 times, right? So if we're talking about Henry Cejudo, who's talking about fighting everybody out there, from 25 to 35 to 45, it doesn't, that's what he does as the double champ or as the triple champ, as he likes to say with the Olympic gold. We'll find out what he does, if he does come back to the sport, or if Volk decides to go north of the border to 155. That actually might intrigue me a little bit more. Let's get to this card here on First Strike, First Look on a Tuesday. And I think one of the more interesting things that you can do out there when you're handicapping MMA is try to look at where you think the lines will move, so you can be anticipatory to try to find the best number. When you look at the main event here, as we talk on a Tuesday here at DraftKings, Rafael Dos Anjos right now is plus 170 against Rafael Fiziev at minus $2. So you got a Rafael against a Rafael, even though they spell the names the same here, in a potential 5-round bout. What do you make of Fiziev right now as a $2 betting favorite against RDA?
My gut reaction is it's a lot. RDA is a legend, probably a Hall of Famer. and he's been in the cage with everybody. He's beaten a lot of great fighters, champion contenders, and Fiziev's, beaten some good fighters. But he's not sniffed a guy who's sniffed gold.
No.
So I think that the line at this point is a little high. I mean, RDA is 37 years old, so it's really not many people are gonna be rushing to the window to bet a guy whose physical prime was 5+ years ago, and a guy who's had some up and down performances, I guess you could call it, over the last 5-6 years since he won that belt. But he's got experience, and sometimes experience is meaningful, and sometimes it's not. Like, look at Robbie Lawler versus Brian Barberena last week, right?
Right.
Lawler's got all the experience in the world, and he was using it for a round and a half, but at the end of the day, the damage caught up, and Barberena just turned it into a street fight, and the guy who took more damage went down first. And I could maybe see something like that happening here, because I know Fiziev is a action fighter. He'll push the pace, and like I said, he's got one loss in his career, and it was like a freak KO in 2019. So he looks for finishes, and it's just going to be really determined. It'll be determined by how Rafael Dos Anjos is doing physically. Not just like conditioning and everything, but like if he still has a chin, if he still has the strength, if he still has the speed and all that stuff. So I feel like there will be money on Dos Anjos before the fight starts, but it could be, a little bit tug of war back and forth, just because I feel like the name recognition's all with Dos Anjos. But if you look at the metrics, the age, and the record, people are going to be attracted to Fiziev.
No question. Again, right now, the over is juiced heavily over 4.5 rounds in this non-title bout, but it is a main event at minus $1.55. If you think Fiziev or RDA could get an early stoppage in this one, you get plus money right now at under 4.5 rounds. Let's talk about the co-main a little bit very quickly here. When you look at Caio Borralho is back in there against Armen Petrosyan here. What do you make of Caio in this spot? A relatively quick turnaround from his last victory. He looked very impressive. And now he's over a $2 betting favorite against Petrosyan here. 215 against Petrosyan's plus 185 in the comeback. What do you make of this number so far on a Tuesday?
I think that, again, I think the number's high. I say it all the time. Yeah. But, if we go back a few weeks to Sarukian versus Gamrot, this kind of feels like that same type of fight again, where both guys have a ton of potential. Both guys are really good. We haven't seen either of them enough to really know what their full potential is. We can kind of project a little bit, but they both have one fight in the UFC, and they both have a couple of contender series fights, so we don't know how good they are yet. And I know in lower organizations, Petrosyan has like 6 of his 7 wins are KOs. He's got the nuclear option. I just think that laying 210 when it's 2 guys with 1 loss each, both fairly young, both fairly new to the UFC, I reluctantly would lay the juice there. That's for sure.
Ooh. Okay.
I would be reluctant to lay the juice, I should say.
Okay, there we
go.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, no, I would lean with the
lay
dog.
That 215. Yeah, exactly right. Talking with Britton Hess here on a Tuesday First Strike First Look. Before we get to Fridays, we're trying to anticipate maybe where we see some of these lines potentially find the value here earlier in the week. Very quickly, I know you're not a big fan normally of backing Jared Vander here, but he's going to take on Chase Sherman in a battle of heavyweights. And right now, Jared's laying $1.80. Chase, we know, sometimes takes fights on short notices, feels like an opponent out there, plus $1.55 for Chase. Which heavyweight would you back here if you had to?
Well, you know that I love fading both of these guys. I think I bet against both of these guys in every single fight they've had in the last 3 years. So where I stand on these guys. I think Jared Vander actually has a little bit more to him, though. He's been fighting higher quality opponents. He's been losing, but the guys that he's been fighting have been a little bit better than who I've seen Sherman face. I mean, obviously, Sherman's last fight was against Alexander Romanov on a late, he filled in late on that one. So, yeah, that's the exception to his strength of schedule. But before that, it's like Jake Collier, Parker Porter, old man Andrei Arlovsky, losing to all 3 of those guys. Obviously, Andrei's a legend, but Parker Porter, not too impressive to me. Legend. Jake Collier, not too impressive to me. And Jared Vander, he got submitted by Alexei Olnik, who was one of the greatest ever to do it in the division. He lost a very close split decision to Andrei Arlovsky, and he lost to Alexander Romanov, who's he's a guy who's raising up in the division. So I lean Jared Vander here. I mean, Chase Sherman, this is his second UFC stint. he already ran out. You know, he was already kind of ran off once because he just did not perform well enough to justify being on the roster. He came back to fill in in a fight late during the COVID years, and or right before the COVID years, and you know, he got a win against Isaac Villanueva, who's also very not good at all, and then he's lost 4 in a row. I think that this is going to be Chase Sherman's swan song in the UFC.
Ooh, could be the last time we see Chase in there if he can't get this win against Jared Vander. Very quickly, when you look at the rest of the card, and again, here on a Tuesday, you see the former Black Zillion. That's how far we go back with Michael Johnson. He's going to go up there against Jamie Malarkey. Could be a very interesting bout there. Cynthia Calvillo against Nina Nunes. You got Cast Iron Casey. She's back. Courtney is against Antonina Shevchenko. Of course, that's Valentina's sister. There are some names riddled up and down this fight card, Britton. On a Tuesday, which number and name attracts you the most?
Michael Johnson, 2-1. Mm-hmm. You know, he's plus 200 versus Malarkey. Michael Johnson's 1-5 in his last, or 1-4 in his last 5 fights. But that last win was a KO against Alan Patrick. You know, if Michael still has that durability to make it to the second round and to land the punishing shot that ends the fight, you know, Jamie Malarkey is definitely a guy that can get KO'd. He's got 5 losses and 3 of those are via KO. I think, you know, speed, strength should be on the side of Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson's obviously older. He's been in more wars. He's a little bit taller, though, so Johnson should have the reach advantage. I think that, you know, people are maybe rushing to bury Michael Johnson a little too soon. I think he's got a little bit more left in the tank.
Still a legend to me, and certainly for those out there when you think of how long Michael Johnson's still be getting it done here in the UFC. So 2-1 underdog, the betting underdog on a Tuesday, maybe good value there. We'll see how that number moves before we get to First Strike on Friday. Britton, always appreciate the conversation, my friend. We'll talk again on Friday for First Strike.
All right, Dave, it's always fun, and thanks for having me on.
There he is, everybody. Britton Hess. Check him out. Check me out. Check out our whole cast and crew Friday. First Strike on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.